Shalom to all.
Shalom to all. Today we're going to learn Masechet Shabbat, Perek Yod, Mishnah Daled, and Mishnah Hey. And today's Mishnah is being learned B'schos of Shalom Zalman V'Zugasar Ma'asiyat V'Chayetz Chalatzim. They should be given for the Sachat Tzlach and Siyat Deshmai, good health, Parnasa B'Shafa, and Cult of Zala, and B'schos Asabas Rachel. She should be Zecharia to find Reziv Kagan B'Kar of Mamish. Now in this Mishnah we're going to be talking about Meleches Machshavas, which loosely translated means that when a person does a Malacha, they have to have the proper Machshava. They have to have intention to do so. If they were in the middle of doing something and Agav Malacha happened, so they're not necessarily going to be chayav for that. Or even if a person intended to do a malacha, but it didn't come out exactly the way they wanted it to, so they also might be patur because it's not a malachas machshavas. So the Mishnah brings up an example. A person had kavana to bring something out in front of him. Let's say he was wearing this item around his neck, and he intended for it to be carried out in front of him. But then it somehow swung around behind him, and when he ended up carrying it out, it was behind him, not in front of him. Pater, he's pater. And that's because he didn't accomplish what he intended to do. When he intended to bring it out in front of him, he wanted it to have a shmira ma'ula. It would be guarded very well. It would be watched very solidly because it's in front of him. When it's behind him, it's not watched so well, so therefore it's not the malach he intended to do, and he'd be pater for that. However, la'achrav ubala lefanav, if he intended to be might see it behind him, and it swung around to the front of him, so chayav, he'd be chayav in that case, because even though it might look like he didn't do what he intended to do, he actually did do so. He did it in a better manner than what he intended. He intended to take it out with a shmira pechusa with it behind him, and he took it out with a shmira ma'ula with it in front of him, so he's chayev. That's something similar to this, but Emesamar in truth they said, ha'isha chakeres basinar, a woman who's wearing a sinar, which is some sort of beged that she wears for tznius, and she has something attached to it. Bein milfanel, bein milachareha. Whether she ends up carrying this item out, she's might see it with it in front of her or behind her, chayevas, she'd be chayev for that. She came royally as chayzer, because this is something which turns around anyway. Often this sinar will turn around on her. It doesn't stay in one place while she's wearing it, so she knows that something that's attached to the sinar might end up being in front of her, might end up being behind her, so she's going to be chayev for being might see this item, no matter which way she ends up being might see it. Now Rabbi Huda says, Af Makabli Pitkin. The same thing applies with Makabli Pitkin, which is the royal letter carrier. And these royal letter carriers would take these letters and they would put them in a tube that they would wear around their neck. And this thing would always be swinging around. It would be in front of them or behind them. So they too would be chayav for being mighty something in this tube, no matter which way, if it's behind them or it's in front of them. Moving on to Mishnah was something similar. Hamaiti kikal Rosh Hashanah. Let's say a person carries a loaf of bread out to the Rosh Hashanah. Chayav, so he's chayav. If two people carried it out, Peturin, they're patur. That's because this is a malacha, which is normal for one person, and two people ended up doing it, so we have a pasuk that tells us that they're patur. However, lo yachal echad lo yitziyai, if one person is not able to carry it out, it's way too large of a loaf of bread. It's one of those giant revish chasanechalas that one person can't carry. Lo yitziyu shnayim, and two people carried it out, chayavim, they are chayav, because that's the normal way to carry it. You need two people to do it, and two people did it. Now, Reb Shimon paters in that case, but when a pasuk like Reb Shimon. And moving on to yet another case. Hamaitzi eichlin, pachas mikashir bakli. A person is might see food, but less than the shear, and he was might see it in a kli. So let's say he has a bowl, that's his kli, and he has food inside this bowl, which is less than the shear. What's the shear of food that a person would be chayav for being might see? As we know already, that's kagregeres, the size of a dried fig. So he had less than a gregeres of food in this bowl, and he was might see it. Pater afal kli. He's pater not only on the food, but also on the kli. Now why is that? The kli itself is very large. He should be chayav for being might see the kli at least. The answer is shakli tfelolai, because the kli, this bowl, is tafel, it's secondary to the food. He intended to be might see the food. He didn't intend to be might see the bowl. The only way he could be might see the food was by putting it in the bowl. But the main thing over here that he's being might see is the food and not the bowl. And since he's not chayav for the food because it's less than the shear, so he's not chayav for the bowl either. Something similar as hachay bamita. He carried out someone who's alive, who's on a bed. So that means that he picked up the bed and he carried out the bed and this person. Pater afalamita. He's pater not only for carrying the person, but also for the bed. The reason why he's pater for carrying the person is because of a concept, chai noises atmai. Someone who's alive is really carrying themselves, and you're not really carrying them. Now, why is he pater for the bed? Same thing like in the previous case, shamita tfelolai, because the bed is secondary to the person. However, as hameis bamita, if he carries out someone who's dead on a bed, chayiv, so then he would be chayiv, because over there he's chayiv for carrying. There's no patur of chai noises atmai. V'chein, and also kazais min hameis, if he's carrying out even just a kazais from a mace, or kazais min anavela, or a kazais from an avela, from a carcass, a chadash min hasheretz, or even a lentil size of a sheretz, chayiv, he would be chayiv for that as well. That's because a kazais from a mace, kazais from an Avela and a Kadosh min Asheret, they would be matame him, so that's considered chashuv in terms of Haitzah and Shabbos as well. Now Reb Shimon Patros in these cases, even if he carries out a mace on a mita, and that's because Reb Shimon holds this is a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. This is a malacha that's not needed for the malacha itself. He's not trying to be mitzi this mace or part of it because he wants it to be there. He just doesn't want it to be here, and that's considered a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, and therefore according to Reb Shimon he'd be pater for that. We're going to stop here for the day. Pick up tomorrow with Mishnah Vav and Parak Yud Aleph Mishnah Aleph. For now, everyone should have a wonderful day.